Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. In episode 28, I started a MAUI Blazor .NET Rocks podcast client app. The app downloads metadata for current shows from a public API. The user can select an episode, or show as I call them, and the MP3 file is downloaded locally and played. In episode 30, I added info for the guests with their pictures and bios to the details page, and also the show links. I also added the ability to manage playlists with basic CRUD actions. Our app now saves all the data it downloads when online, so it can be used when the app is offline. In this episode, I'll implement the playlist functionality, adding and removing shows, moving shows up and down in the list, and actually playing the entire playlist. MAUI Blazor Podcast Client Part 3 is coming right up on the .NET Show. So we're going to start with the MAUI DNR2, MAUI Blazor app, from episode 30. And if you don't remember the URL, here it is. So here's the repo for this application. github.com/carlfranklin/MAUIDNR3. So I've taken this list of user stories from the Xamarin Forms version of this, which we started quite a while back. So let's go through them. Completed user stories are in italics. So we've already done this one. As a user, I want to create a new playlist and give it a name. I want the app to automatically persist my playlists. Yep, does that. I want to be able to retrieve a playlist from the list of playlists I have created. Yep. I want to delete an existing playlist. Yep. Now, this is what we're doing today. I want to select one or more episodes to add to a playlist. I want to be able to remove episodes from my playlist. I want to be able to move episodes in my playlist forward or backward in play order. Finally, I want the same level of audio control for a playlist as I have for a single episode. Play, pause, stop, go back, and go forward. So before we get started, I need to let you know about a little problem I discovered with the connectivity.current.network access call, which, if you remember, is an API service. This right here, connectivity.current.network access, well, it turns out that this only returns accurately if we're on the UI thread. So this URL right here is where you can see this issue. Connectivity implementation not thread safe on Windows, returning incorrect network status. So in the current version of MAUI and the current version of .NET 6, this is still an issue. But hopefully it won't be an issue in the future. Still, I'm going to work around that. We'll come back to this. So once I started playing around with the new features, it became really clear that I needed to move most of the fields in indexrazor.cs to globals.cs, where they can maintain their state in between navigations. So that in turn required changes to all the other files. So rather than show you how to refactor one bit at a time, we're going to just replace the files, which are now well commented, and I'll go through all the changes afterward. So let's start with globals, which doesn't seem like a good name for holding state. So we're going to rename it to app state. Just do a slow double click on globals in the Solution Explorer, type app state with a capital S for state, and then say yes to changing the class name as well as the references. So now everything that was pointing to globals is now pointing to app state, and everybody's happy. I love Visual Studio. Now that we've done that, let's replace all of this code with the code from the repo. So we'll go through all of this later, but I want to show you a couple of things. First of all, we have this isOnline as a public bool. Now down at the bottom, we have this getOnline status. It doesn't return the Boolean, but what it does is sets the Boolean so we can check it later. And if we're on the main thread, great. We'll just access it normally. But if we're not, we use this little MAUI trick right here. Main thread.begin invoke on main thread. All right, now we're going to replace everything in API service. And this is the main difference right here. If appstate.isOnline, and I took isOnline out of here, moved it to appstate, of course, and pretty much everything else is exactly the same. All right, now let's go to pages, indexrazor.cs, the code behind for indexrazor. Let's change that up. So as you can see, most of those fields that we had in here, all shows, etc., those have been moved to appstate. Now let's change the markup for indexrazor. Again, we'll get to this in a minute. We need to change details, code behind first. Now we can move on to the playlist functionality. To start, I'm going to modify the UI so it shows the number of episodes or shows in the currently selected playlist. So let's go to playlists.razor and replace it with this from the repo. And I know I haven't gone over everything, but I want to do this first. Finally, the code behind. Now we'll run the app. So the first thing that you'll notice is that you'll see the reset button is only enabled if you specified a filter term. Say it's disabled. But if I put in something like geek out, press tab, and now it's enabled and I can reset. You also might have noticed that I've simplified the text, details, playlists, and if you scroll down to the bottom, it just says next 20, and that number comes from the records to read property. So let's click next 20, make sure that works. All good. All right, so let's go to playlists and then click the add button, and I'll make one called Geek Outs. And as you can see now, it says Geek Outs 0 because that's the number of shows in the list up here as well. And when I go back, you can see it says Geek Outs 0 at the top. Now there are a few more changes. A gray Show Playlist button appears next to the Playlists button. This replaces the current list of shows, even if they are filtered, with the shows in the playlist. And each show has now a gray Add button next to it. And this is how you add a show in the list to the playlist. Let's filter the shows by Geek Out again. Now we're going to go through each show and select Add. And as we do, notice that the button changes to Remove and that the number of shows in the playlist updates. See? So let's go through and add all of them. Now, we are going to come up with a way to add all of the shows currently on the screen, but that's coming up. Now I'm going to close the app and run it again. Now when I go to playlists, you'll notice that our Geek Out show has 20 in it. So I'll select that and go back. Now I'm going to select the Show Playlist button. And the list that had the top 20 shows in it now shows all of the shows, shows the shows that are in the list. So let's see if we can add a few more things. I'm going to type space in the filter. And you'll notice that our Show Playlist button goes back to Show Playlist, not Show All. Because we are showing all. In fact, this is filtered. We're no longer looking at the playlist. Even though this first one is in the list, it's really here because of the filter space, which is on all of the shows. So this is all of the shows that, even if they are or are not in the playlist, that have space in them. So look at this one, Carl and Richard Space Out. That does not have Geek Out in the title. I only added the first 20 Geek Outs anyway, but I could just add it here. And then lo and behold, we have 21 shows in our Geek Out. So let's go over the code in the markup now. Now one thing you'll notice that all the fields have proper scope. Public for publicly accessible ones, private for just private variables, and in my code behinds, protected instead of public, and private where private is required. These injected things were protected or public, I can't remember which, but I changed them to private because I'm only using them here. All right, let's start with app state. So here are the members that we moved to app state CS, which was globals.cs. All right, so all shows, that got moved. Show numbers, last show number, and episode filter is now a backing field for the episode filter property on the main page in our index code behind. So here are the ones that we've added. Is online, as I said before. Show playlist only determines whether or not to show all the playlist shows on the main page. Otherwise, the current set of shows, filtered or not, is shown. Right? So when we press that button, show playlist. And this is the text because it's going to switch between show playlist and show all. So that goes in the button. Now, I've also created these private fields that are used to save the state before we replace the current view with the selected playlist shows. So this all shows backup string, I'm going to serialize all shows to JSON, and we're going to store it there. Last show number backup, so last show number, before we switch, I'm going to copy that off. And also the episode filter. So let's go down to the methods. We've added add show to playlist, takes a show. Pretty simple. Selected playlist has to be not null. To the shows, we add the show. And we call save to persist to disk. Remove show from playlist. Now the reason I don't just say selected playlist.shows.remove is because these show references may not be the same. So to be safe, I'm going to pull out from shows where the ID matches. So this match is actually a show, and that's the one I'm going to remove. Now, toggle show playlist only. This switches the list of shows in the main page to and from the shows in the selected playlist. So yeah, there's a bit of stuff we have to do here, mostly the backup. So first of all, I'll do the toggle on that Boolean, show playlist only. And if we are showing the playlist, I'm saving the current state, then I'm clearing the episode filter, changing all shows to the selected playlist shows, changing the last show number, and then the button text is going to say show all. Otherwise, if we're not showing the playlist only, we're switching back, we restore the state from the backup values and change the button text. And that works really well. Load playlists we had before, save playlists we had before, and I also talked about get online status already. So let's look at episode filter in index Razor CS. So it needs to be defined here in index because it needs to call status changed after being set. So we're using the app state episode filter string property as a backing field. So the state of the property will be maintained between navigations. So get, pretty simple, just returns app state episode filter. And now we're only setting episode filter on the set if the value has changed. So the first thing I'm doing is switching back to all of the shows. Show playlist only and show playlist only text. All right, and the reason that I don't do the toggle thing is because that's restoring all shows from what we had saved before. I don't care what we have saved before. I'm setting the episode filter, last show number to 0, clearing all shows, got to get the online status, and then call get next batch of shows asynchronously. Finally, and this is most important, I have to say state is changed. So now in index Razor, so here in the top div where we have our filter, our reset button, and our playlist button, if the selected playlist is not null, we're going to add a button to toggle show playlist only. And that calls app state toggle show playlist only directly. So showing the add and remove buttons, that has to happen for each show, right? So that's going to be inside our loop where we have each show and all shows. Right down here. If the selected playlist is not null, because if it is null, we don't care. We're not going to add or remove anything to something that isn't selected. So we're calling this guy right here, if selected playlist contains show. I'll get to that in a minute. Make this a little more readable. Thanks, Visual Studio. If the selected playlist contains the show, we're going to show the remove button, remove show from playlist. Otherwise, we're going to show the add button, add show to playlist. Now, this guy, let's check him out. So just as before, I can't do return app state selected playlist.shows.contains show because the references are not the same. So therefore, I'm pulling the show out of the list by ID, and then I'm returning true if it's not null. All right, let's go to the details page. Go to the code behind and start with uninitialized async. So the only thing that's different is that now I'm doing this get online status check before I call the API, and that's good. All right, on the playlists page, I want to be able to move episodes forward and backward in play order. And I also want to be able to quickly remove episodes. And this can be done fairly simply. We're going to go to Playlists Razor, and down here at the bottom below the edit form, we're going to add some more markup. If this playlist that we're adding or editing has shows in it, in other words, the shows count is greater than 0, I want to go through those shows, and for each one I want to add a div. And if this show isn't the first one, then I want to show an up arrow that when you click on it or touch it calls move up. I haven't made move up yet. And if the show isn't the last show in the list, I want a down arrow or arrow bottom that when you click or touch it calls move down. And then the show title. So now let's add these methods right here. So here's our move up, called from the UI to move a show up in the playlist order. I get the index of it. I call remove at index, and I insert the show at index -1. That moves it up. Now I don't have to worry about index being 0 because I'm not calling it if it's the first one. Conversely, when I call move down, I get the index, I remove at the index, and then I'm inserting it index +1, and I don't have to worry that this is the last index because we're not calling this if the show is the last show in the list. Let's give it a spin. All right, here's our Geek Out show, and this is definitely a bug. I don't know what that is. So if I hit edit, now you can see all the shows here with my arrows that I can move things up. So let's move Geek Out 2020 up one, then down one. Let's take the first one and move it down, and move it back. Take the last one, move it up, and move it back. And that works great. Next, we're going to implement a feature I talked about earlier, adding and removing all the shows on the main page, filtered or not, to and from the selected playlist. So in order to do this in app state, which is where it belongs, we need to move the selected playlist contains show method to app state. So let's go to index razor. Here it is right here. I'm going to just delete it. Go over to app state. Doesn't matter where we add it, but what we do need is public static. All right, so now it can be called from anywhere. Public static, selected playlist contains show. Now we're going to add two more methods here. Add all to playlist, which adds every show and all shows to the selected playlist, and of course calls save playlists afterwards. And remove all from playlist, which calls remove show from playlist because more stuff has to be done than just removing it, right? We have to get a match, and then we remove it, and then we save. So now we're going to replace index razor one more time. So this section is new. If my selected playlist is not null, then I'm calling toggle show playlist only like I was before. And these new buttons for add all and remove all are only there if app state show playlist only is false. In other words, we have to not be showing only the playlist shows, because why would we add all the playlist shows to the playlist? Or remove them all? Remove them all, I can see. Clear playlist. But we could just delete the playlist and create it again too. So let's run it, and we're going to use these new features to recreate our Geek Outs playlist. First of all, I'll select this one and delete it, and we'll recreate it. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to select Geek Out. See the add all and remove all there? So this is the first 20 Geek Outs. So I want to get the next 20. I want all the Geek Outs. I want to keep adding the next 20 till there are no more Geek Outs. And I think that's it. This isn't using the tags, which we'll get to later. This is using the title. These are only shows that have Geek Out in the title. Now if I say add all, that's 64 of them in one fell swoop. Or remove all. Add all, remove all. Easy. Now there are some Geek Outs that don't actually have Geek Out in the title, and those are generally about space. So I'll type space in here, and yes, you can see there are some, but if we start at the bottom and go up, this is the first one, Carl and Richard space out. So let's add that. Return to space, add that. Back in space, add that. And also the James Webb Space Telescope, add that. So now we've got 68 in there. We've got everything that we need. And of course, if we show the playlist, these are all 68. Okay, now let's finally do the code to play the playlist. We're going to modify the details page because the details page is already got the code and everything to play. So we're going to change it up so it can play a playlist as well as a single show. That means in the playlist, after one finishes, it's going to automatically play the next one. So there's one change that I need to make, and we're going to replace the whole thing, but I'll tell you what it is that this URL field right here, we're going to get rid of that. And we're just going to use instead this show.showdetails.file.url. There's no reason to have this extra thing in here. So let's replace it with the code in the repo. So if we scroll down, you can see that URL is commented out. You can remove it if you want. I just wanted to show you that we deleted it. So I added these three fields here. Playing playlist, which is set true when playing through a playlist, because now our page is dual use, remember? Playlist show index, which is a 1-based index of the currently playing show. First show is 1, 10th show is 10. Playlist show count, which is a total number of shows in the playlist. And we're going to need these for the UI. Going to need this for our logic and these two for the UI to show which show we're currently playing. We're going to show the show. We're going to show the show number. Not the show number, the show index. Are you confused yet? I am. Let's start with oninitialized async. So down here, if the show number is null, we're bailing out. If it's not playlist, then it's a particular show number. We're going to do what we did before. Checking get online status in app state before we call the API. Good. Now, if it's a playlist, we're going to load and play the selected playlist. First of all, do we have a selected playlist? No? Bail. Are there any shows in it? Nope. Bail again. Now we're ready to go. We're going to set playing playlist to true. Going to get the online status, and then we're going to get the show number from the first show in the playlist. And we're going to retrieve the show with the details, just like we did up here. And if that comes back not null, we'll set the playlist show count to count and the playlist show index to 1. And then we're going to say play audio. I know. How cool. Now we're going to check out the event handler, player_playback ended. So this happens when playback ends, not when you press stop, not when you press pause, but when you get to the end of the audio. So the first thing we do is we call cleanup. Remember what cleanup is? Everything's stopped, everything's disposed. Then we're going to check to see if we're playing a playlist. And if we are, we're going to call getNextShowInPlaylist. That is either going to set playlist show index to 0 if we're done, or to the next one based index in the list. It's also going to set this show to the next show. All right. But if it's 0 and we're done, we're just going to navigate home. So let's check this one out. So it sets this show to the next show in the playlist and loads the details, very important. But right here, we're doing a check to see if this is the last show in the playlist. And if it is, we'll set playlist show index to 0 and return, and that's the signal that we're done. So we get the next show from the playlist from that index. Now notice we don't set that to this show, right? We're going to use the show number of that and pass that to getShowWithDetails in the API. But before we do that, we'll check the online status and increment the show index. So we're going to change details razor now. So we added this right here. If we're playing the playlist, then we set a new H3 header above the show title that says the playlist name and the index of the count. 1 of 20, 2 of 20, etc. I also added null checks for the guests and for the links. And, perhaps most importantly, this button right here, scoot, and that calls this method scoot. Now this is just for testing, because we need to test automatically going to the next show in the playlist. So I just want to bring us to 3 seconds before the end, right? That's all it does. So now we need to add the button to play the playlist to index. So let's go to index, and I'm just going to replace that with what's in the repo. And this is basically all we're doing. If we're not just showing the playlist list, right, the whole list, we have our add and remove buttons. Otherwise, we're going to add this button with this method, playSelectedPlaylist, which we have to add to index razor CS. And we can put it anywhere we want to. Let's just put it right here. playSelectedPlaylist. All we're doing is navigating to details/playlist. Now let's create a new playlist called test and add the first 2 shows to it. All right, we'll go to playlists. I'm going to add a playlist called test. Go back here and we'll just add the first 2 shows to it. Next, we're going to select the show playlist button and then play playlist.
Amazon Business honors Ricardo Gurgel, owner of
Up to enjoy.
Scoot. Go to the beginning of the next one. Yep, works.
Be 21 and up to enjoy.
And after the last one, it goes back to the beginning. Well, let's see how this looks on my Android phone. Now, I don't pretend to have styled everything absolutely wonderfully. We'll get to styling in another episode. All right, here we go. Let's go to playlists. I've already got a test that I've created with the first 2 in it. Let's show the playlist. Play playlist.
Parece que con FastPlay se han olvidado de nosotros.
Scoot.
Go to findrealrelief.com.
Next one plays. Scoot.
Full connection. Learn more at xfinity.com/tmofax.
And we're back. So in this episode, we picked up where we left off in the code we wrote in episode 30. We refactored the app. We renamed globals to app state, moving the state out of index razor CS and into app state. We added the ability to add and remove shows from the selected playlist, and also the ability to move shows up and down in the play order. We also added the ability to add all shows to the selected playlist and remove all shows from the selected playlist. Finally, we added the ability to play through a playlist. In the next episode, we'll add more features such as pre-downloading the playlist audio files and metadata. And we'll also add a sleep timer to stop playing after a certain amount of time. Some decisions will have to be made, and we'll talk about those as well. More to come. Stay tuned to the .NET Show. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Please visit blazortrain.com and the .NETshow.com for more great content.